All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're talking about something that is honestly pretty mind-bending. We're looking at a brand new model that tries to explain how a thought, an actual physical thought, takes shape and moves through your brain. This is going to be fascinating.
I mean, have you ever really stopped to think about it? How does a simple feeling, like the heat from a stove, turn into a solid thought like, whoa, that's hot? And then, bam, an action, pulling your hand away. How does all of that happen inside your head in less than a blink of an eye? Well, the answer, at least according to this Brain Kinematics Model, is that it's not some single spark, It's not one neuron just flipping on like a light switch. It's more like a beautifully coordinated wave of activity flowing through your brain. And the coolest part? The path that this wave follows is actually laid out beforehand, thanks to a hidden mathematical rule that's just baked into the very structure of our brains. Okay, so if a thought is a wave, the first thing we need to understand is the landscape it's traveling over, right? So let's start with layer 1 of this model, the actual physical structure of the brain.
So, get this. It turns out the neurons in your brain aren't just sprinkled around randomly. Nope. They actually follow a very specific mathematical pattern called a lognormal distribution. Now, what's really important here is the shape of this pattern. It's not a perfect bell curve. It's skewed, which basically means you have a few spots with a super high concentration of neurons. And that design, that specific unevenness, is the secret sauce for an efficient brain.
And this isn't just some weird little factoid either. It's a fundamental principle. As this quote points out, they see this exact same pattern in all sorts of mammals, from tiny mice all the way up to us humans. It's like a universal blueprint for how to build a brain.
So, why this pattern? What's the big deal? Well, it creates what scientists call network heterogeneity, which is just a fancy way of saying it makes the network varied and uneven. And that gives the brain a huge advantage. We're talking faster information flow, learning that's way more robust, and a bigger capacity for memory. It's a universal design because, really, it's just the natural outcome of how our brain cells grow and multiply when we're developing.
All right, so we've got our landscape, our map of the brain. But a map is just a static picture, right? To really understand thought, we need to add some motion. And that brings us to the second layer of the model, the dynamics, or how thought actually flows.
Yeah, when scientists look at the brain with tools like fMRI and EEG, they can see that mental activity isn't just popping up randomly here and there. It actually travels. It moves across the brain in these distinct waves. And these aren't just random ripples, they're directed currents of thought, flowing over that very specific landscape we were just talking about.
So what makes these waves go in a specific direction? Well, it's basically a simple energy gradient. The easiest way to think about it is like a waterfall. All the information coming in from your senses, what you see, hear, feel, that's like the water at the top of the waterfall. It has a ton of potential energy, but it's not really moving yet. Then you have the motor cortex, the part that controls your actions. That's like the bottom of the waterfall, where all that potential energy gets turned into kinetic energy, into actual movement. This natural drop creates a predictable clockwise flow, taking you from sensation all the way to action. What's really wild is that this means there are actually two kinds of waves happening in your brain at the same time. You've got this constant background carrier wave. You can think of it as the brain's idle hum. It's just always on, even when you're resting or sleeping. But then, when you need to actually do something, a specific, directed information package wave gets triggered, and it basically rides right on top of that background wave.
Okay, so let's recap. We have the landscape, and we have the waves flowing across it. But what's steering those waves? What makes a thought about, say, a crunchy apple totally different from a thought about the meaning of life? Well, that's where our third and final layer comes in, the brain's chemical weather system. This is where things like dopamine and serotonin, our neurotransmitters, enter the picture. But here's the twist. They aren't carrying the thoughts themselves. Instead, think of them as creating these big, slow-moving chemical gradients across the brain, almost like weather fronts or massive ocean currents. They create what's called a bias field, and it's this field that gently nudges and steers the path of those much faster-moving thought waves.
Let's take a look at some of the big ones. A wave of dopamine, for instance, is going to steer your thoughts toward goals and getting things done. Serotonin, on the other hand, creates a current that shapes your emotional mood, or even what you dream about. Then you've got others like acetylcholine that helps sharpen your attention, or norepinephrine that can just ramp up the speed of your thinking. Each one creates its own unique mental weather, totally changing how you experience the world.
And I think this quote just nails it perfectly. It makes the whole idea so easy to grasp. The neurotransmitters are the deep,
powerful ocean currents, setting the overall direction of things. And our actual thoughts, those faster waves, are just the little surface waves you see riding right on top of those currents.
All right, so we have our three key layers: the structure of the landscape, the dynamics of the waves, and the chemistry of the weather. Now let's put it all together and see the whole picture, this complete architecture for how a thought actually comes to be.
So here's the whole process, step by step. First, you have the structure. That log-normal distribution of neurons creates the perfect, efficient landscape. Then you have the dynamics. Traveling waves move across that landscape in a steady, directed current. And finally, you have the chemistry. The neurotransmitter gradients act like a guidance system, steering that flow where it needs to go. See how each layer just builds perfectly on the one before it?
And when you put it all together, the power of this model is just, wow. It helps explain so much. Like, how can your brain maintain a consistent you while also being flexible enough to learn? This model has an answer. It even suggests that the huge difference between being awake and dreaming might just be a change in that chemical weather. It literally maps the entire journey of a thought, from the first sensation to the final action, as one single, continuous, physical flow.
So I want to leave you with this final, big question. If a thought, something we think of as so intangible, is actually a physical thing, a wave flowing through a mathematically defined landscape, steered by chemical currents, then what does that really mean for consciousness itself? It's a pretty deep question to chew on. Thanks for joining me on this one.